I thought to really put my experience into perspective and to gauge with you a little bit about my personal story with my son, and then about my professional background as well. So the story is going to start with Noah. It's my son, who is 8. He was diagnosed with a working diagnosis he was given of ASD in 2013. He displayed lots of atypical ADHD behaviours. He was quite an aggressive child. He had many sleep issues. He couldn't regulate. His physical development and his social and emotional development just didn't match up. I mean, this is a little boy that was running when he was 11 months old. He has lots of attachment issues with me, and so forth. I mean, I'll go into that a little bit more. So this is what we're going to discuss. I'm going to go through Noah's story, tell you a little bit more about why I felt it was important to set up SenTalk. I don't know if we've got anyone from Wandsworth Borough. I'd imagine we've got a nice mixture of different places. And then I'm going to get into the promoting positive ADHD behaviours and talk a little bit about sensory issues. Okay. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this lovely creature here. Has anybody seen The Red Beast or read the book? I cannot recommend that story enough for children that have anger issues or, you know, behavioural issues where emotional regulation is very difficult for them. So the first signs of Noah's behaviour really came out when he was 2 years old. At that point, having a 2-year-old, you think it's just, you know, the normal sort of toddler age. I remember being called into his nursery and being told that my child was non-compliant. So, 2-year-old, non-compliant. He had issues with food. He didn't eat a lot of beans. Again, that sort of all stems into sensory issues, which are quite common with both autism and ADHD. He was socialising or in a social setting from a really young age. I went back to university when Noah was 4 months old. So he went into a private nursery, and he just did not find that setting suitable. He didn't engage with other children. You know, it was very clear that he kept himself very separate. Obviously, again, it's a really young age. It's hard to tell whether those are actually symptoms of something else or whether, you know what, he's just an independent child. But it was brought up quite a lot to me. It was in the back of my mind. I thought perhaps there might be something else here. As I started ticking off the box, I don't know if anybody first starts having those ideas, suddenly starts Googling like crazy, and then you find all these checklists that are like appear for parents, like, oh my gosh, it's that and that and that. And you could honestly, WebMD, don't do it. So, yeah, and the sleep issues as well. Noah has never slept properly. I can probably 5 or 6 occasions where I've known my son to have a full night's sleep. So the very first thing when the schools and the nurseries and everyone was pointing out this misbehaviour was to address the sleep issues. I have to mention here, I don't know if anybody else is a single parent, but if you have a child that has behavioural issues or is displaying some non-compliant behaviour, if you're a single parent, you're automatically put in a box. And I genuinely feel that that is the case. It was like, oh, she's alone. She's quite young. Yeah, I was 22 when I had my son. So I had a lot of stigma to already deal with. So even though I had all of this experience working with children with ADHD and other social issues, care leavers, I still wasn't ready to address it because I felt that I was fighting that stigma and I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to just be the young single parent who had the naughty child. So I'd say that I tried to power through until Noah got into his first nursery. I'm assuming most of you have probably been to several different schools and nurseries and experienced all that sort of stuff. Noah went to a school that was local to us and he was there for 3 weeks. and it was suggested that perhaps he find another school. At that point, and you know, this is nursery. At that point, I didn't understand what my rights were. I was embarrassed, I was stigmatised, and I just felt awful. So I done it. I kind of went under my rock and I just took my son and I desperately tried to find another school for him and got him in somewhere else. Unfortunately, knowing now what I know, I probably should have fought a little bit harder there, and I probably should have addressed a few more things, but it takes time. And that was obviously not the right place. We had some horrible comments at that school. Noah, I think in his lifetime, has been to 3 parties. He doesn't have any friends. He doesn't necessarily care that he doesn't have any friends. He's quite open about who he wants and what for, so he likes to strategise about who he's going to play with. So he has one particular child, he's like, if I want to talk about Minecraft, I'll talk to him, and then that's it. He probably won't speak to him again for 2 months. So I guess what I'm trying to say there is, although we find it quite sad that, you know, maybe our children don't have as many friends or don't have the relationships that we understand, it might actually not necessarily be the same issue for them. They might actually be quite happy that no one's bothering them. So yes, the school. So the next school that Noah went to, so bear in mind we've got all these issues sort of arising. He doesn't play with other children, he doesn't eat, he's non-compliant. We then put him into this nursery, which was a free-flowing nursery, which honestly is absolutely the worst place ever. There were 45 children in there at one time. This place was huge. Noah spent most of his days in the bathroom. He would lock himself in the cubicle. It was just completely overwhelming for him. I wanted to tell you this story as well about him being in nursery, because I think this is when the penny dropped for me. I got a phone call when I was at work telling me that I needed to get Noah and that he'd had an accident. So every parent's nightmare, oh my gosh, he's had an accident, what's wrong? I get there and Noah is in a white shirt, he's under a table, covered in blood, hissing at everybody. Actually hissing and growling. What happened was Noah decided to go onto the slide. And one of the teachers had gone out and said to Noah, it's not the right time, you need to come in. So Noah, being Noah, decided, I'm going to walk on the outside of the slide, right at the top. So he was walking around, and every time the teacher come closer, he would go, whoa, to see her reaction. They spent 20 minutes trying to coax this boy down off of the slide. In the end, when he actually managed to get back in, when he decided, actually, you know what, I'm a bit tired of this, it's not as fun as it was, and he slipped sideways off the slides and cut his lip. Worst thing you could do with my son is try and help him if he's hurt himself. Just don't go there. So all of these teachers, obviously in instinct, you know, their responsibility, he's under their care, rush towards him. Oh, no, let's do this. Absolutely freaked. He ran around, hid under a table. So you've got 3 teachers chasing him screaming, hissing and growling at everybody. Now you've got 30 children screaming because there's a child covered in blood running for them, as they saw. It was absolute carnage when I got there. He wouldn't let anybody do anything. He wouldn't let me take him to the hospital. He wouldn't let anyone clean it. I'm fine. And now he's got a really impressive scar on his lip. So he's quite pleased at that. Now he's 8. It's like, well, you know, you haven't got one of these. But yeah, so every child is different, I guess. Noah and the Red Beast. I honestly think that my son, like I said, he's got comorbidities, so he's also diagnosed with on the autistic spectrum. I feel that when I wake up, and I don't know if anyone else has got children that have 2 diagnoses, it is like Jekyll and Hyde. I can instantly tell you within 3 seconds of seeing that child, without a word, without anything, who's coming out today. And I'm pre-prepared. So I will look at him and I'll think, okay, yes, it's Mr. ADHD, get your running shoes on, because it's going to be fun. Or, oh no, you know, a little bit more of an autism struggle today, so, well, it's always running shoes to be fair, but be a bit more sensitive, so he might need his ear defenders, he might need other things with him during that day. So it's a very, very special relationship. Noah's never really been very good at regulating his emotions. I was speaking to Alistair earlier on about how articulate my son is. So, like I said, he was walking, he was running at 11 months old. His physical development's always been, you know, up there. I mean, he does have OT issues, but in terms of sort of, you know, visually, sometimes, which is the hardest thing, he would appear to be fine and ordinary, and I hate to use the word normal, but society gives us this impression of what normal is, and Noah fits that category. Emotionally, he doesn't quite get it. He doesn't understand. You know, he's got very narrow ideas of how things are, and he is not afraid to tell you if you're absolutely wrong. Noah's teacher yesterday was telling me that he was teaching a lesson at the front of the class, and Noah was right at the back. He doesn't often engage, but every now and then, you know, if you've done something wrong, I have to say. And the teacher had made a comment, and it was something about history or a date, because Noah's a very sort of fact-based child. And he walked all the way from the back of the class, and he just tugged on Mr. Coleman's top, and he just said, "You're wrong." And the whole class was just like, and Mr. Coleman's obviously trying to pacify Noah. Okay, no, but you are wrong. So, and I'd like to tell you why. So, he knows his stuff. So the emotional regulation is a really, really interesting thing. I genuinely think occupational therapy techniques are so important to boost emotional regulation. A lot of children with ADHD hold tension in their bodies. The most common area is at the top of their bodies, in their shoulders. That's why things like heavy work, which I'll get into in a little while, is really good to release that tension. So it's all about managing. So if you can manage your body, you can regulate your emotions better as well. So there's a lot to be said about the connection between your body and the way that you behave. I also wanted just to mention as well that my child is known as a flight child. So when things get tough, he is out, and he is the Houdini. He has been to 3 primary schools so far. Like I said, he's 8, and he has managed to get out of all of them. And it doesn't matter what locks you put on, there's a technique, he's going to work it out. You know, if someone's coming to do a delivery and no one's anywhere near that door, he is slipping through. So that's always a massive worry with children, and safety awareness and social boundaries. But it's a good indicator of things have just hit a wall. So unfortunately, we get them. Yeah, and I also just wanted to mention about the process in which Noah's diagnosis happened for us. So, as I said, the first nursery that he went to picked up on some behaviour at 2, which is quite young to sort of start recognising some sort of irregularities with, in terms of behaviour. 0 to 5 is a really difficult area to get a diagnosis, because obviously with the natural sort of progression and development of children, there can be sort of behaviours that are seen in just the ordinary milestones. So he had his referral, which came from nursery, the first nursery that he was at. I had the assessment team that was at Wandsworth come and do lots of observations on Noah, and I had all of these little words that were thrown around, had absolutely no idea. Oh, it's ODD, oh, it's social communication, oh, it's, what's the other one, tactile defensiveness, which for now is honestly just he doesn't like to touch certain things. But when you're talking about a really small child, you're thinking, oh my gosh, what do all these things mean? And we need to get a glossary here, because there's so many different terminologies. But essentially what they were trying to say to me is your child's got ADHD. But no one wants to tell him to go through that. He got to reception, and unfortunately the teacher that he had at the time, the only way I could explain now is perhaps she didn't have a lot of experience, or perhaps she was a bit of an ADHD denier, because there's lots of deniers, or, you know, again, I'm a single parent, so I'm pretty sure that might have been a little tick box in her head. She actually said to the practitioner that was doing the observations to Noah, well, he doesn't look autistic, there's nothing wrong with him. And she honestly held that back for a year. He's fine, he's fine. She said he was fine. He didn't speak to anybody. He had no relationships. That was probably the worst year that he had. It was worse because we weren't seeing the negative behaviour we usually associate a condition like ADHD. We were seeing a complete withdrawal from life. That was it. My child was vacant for that whole year. Honestly, of all the behaviour and all of the aggression and the violence, that was the worst time that I've ever felt for my son. It was sad. It was incredibly sad. You know, you've got a 5-year-old child there that just is off. Because he knew nobody was going to support him there. He knew. So, unfortunately, sometimes we do get those relationships, and if you don't have a good working relationship with wherever your child is, it can sometimes hold that process that is so important to getting the right support in place. When Noah went into year 2, I had a similar experience. We had, I believe the teacher meant the best, but again, the experience wasn't there. And their response and their answer, because now we were seeing the other side, now we were seeing the aggression, because this kid had been, you know, shut up for a year. He'd not had any quality of life at that school. So this year, he was angry. He was just angry with everyone, life, everybody. That was it. He came into the classroom, he went under the tables, he threw things, he hit teachers, he bit them, he spat at them. He done anything he could to be heard, to be noticed. Because I truly feel that the year before had damaged him so much that that was the only way that he was going to communicate in his way. So that was tough. Then came the diagnosis the same year, and then suddenly everyone was like, oh yeah, so what can we do to help? And it's like, well, thanks. And he was about 1.5 years behind in education, because their answer every single time there was a behavioural problem, remove him from the class. What happens if you remove a child from a class? They're not learning social skills, they're not learning tolerance, they're not understanding themselves. In fact, if anything, they're learning that if I be a little bit like that, or I do that, I don't have to do that literacy lesson, I can go outside. So what did Noah do? Every time he came into class and he had enough, 10 minutes, he was out, he was playing with dinosaurs in the carpet, he had a grand time. So it was a difficult lesson. That teacher was pushed to the absolute brink that year, and I decided that I was really going to push for an education healthcare plan, which was a battle in itself. I don't know if anyone's gone there or going for it. It's tough. Evidently it's a lot tougher now, but it was tough on its own. The SenTalk told me there's no way he'd get it. He's not going to get any support, and you know, we've got no funding, so we can't have someone sit with him. And he was excluded from trips before he was even taken on any. He had one teacher who discussed all week about this lovely trip they were going on to Kew Gardens in front of him, and even gave him a sketchbook, and the day before told me he's not going. Nobody told him. So I had to sit there in the evening and tell this boy that he wasn't allowed to go. He didn't understand. He honestly didn't understand, and his instant response was that he'd been naughty, when actually he hadn't done anything at all this time. And I think that stayed with him for a long time. He still talks about little memories that creep up that he has from before, and he's still trying to regulate and understand. why some of those things happened or didn't happen, which is awful as a parent, awful, because sometimes we don't have answers, do we? So, you know, we just keep going. Yeah, so that was that bit. So this is Noah. And I thought it was really important to give you a picture of him, because I've spoken about the behaviour, I've spoken about the aggression, I've spoken about all of the other sort of symptoms and issues that I've had with Noah and that he's had himself, because at the end of the day, you know, we're talking about our difficulty in trying to cope with these, but at the end of the day, these children are lost in their own heads. They're trying to regulate just as much. The behaviour is the communication. So I thought it would be nice to give you an image of him, who actually looks quite angelic there, which is ironic. Okay, so yeah, I've gone through the diagnosis. Medication was one I just wanted to note, that medication is a really difficult choice for a parent to make. Recently, this is why I added this in, recently I came across like a mum's forum group, which is quite popular in the borough that I live in, and they posted this absolutely horrendous picture of this child sitting in a chair being force-fed through a funnel, and there are a few vats of things and they've got labels on them, and one of them is pesticides and one of them is sugar and the other one is Ritalin. And I thought, that's really interesting. So me being me, obviously, I had to say something. So I had to make a complaint about it, because it's an incredibly tough decision. The reason I bring it up is because it's a very individual choice. So I just want to reiterate, as a parent and as somebody that's worked in this field, that it's absolutely your choice. And it's an important choice to make, and you should never ever feel, sorry, it's quite emotional, isn't it? You should never feel under any pressure from society or anywhere else, because your child is an individual person, you're an individual parent. So all of our journeys are different, you know. I just thought it would be important to mention that. Because, finding the right support, I think for most parents, talking to other parents is the most valuable support you'll ever find, parent to parent. There are things that we can relate to each other about that no professional can even understand about that journey. That's why you'll find a lot of people that do the sort of advocacy work that I do, or do a lot of the stuff that ADHD Richmond do, are parents themselves, and they've probably had, if not a similar journey to you. So really, really, really do try and engage with that. Education and healthcare plans, difficult journey. Again, that parent-to-parent support is so important for the stages. I mean, it does seem, my borough in particular at the moment is quite difficult, but we've got lots of professionals that understand education and healthcare plans a lot better than me. I actually took my education and healthcare plan off the SenTalk at my son's second school. I felt like she was doing a bad job, and I taught myself how to draft it and do all this, and spent many, many hours on the computer at 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to put the best in place. You know, I scraped pennies together to make sure he could have a private OT session or SLT session, and I'm sure many of you do the same. We find ways round, and we try and get the best support. At the end of the day, that's really all we want, is the best support for our children. So I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about SenTalk. I won't go massively in depth with it, but this experience with my son and trying to get the education healthcare plan, which took a little while, it was very complex, there were lots of different issues. ADHD as a sole condition, there's still a lot of stigma around, and I feel like obtaining an education healthcare plan, or even getting a school to recognise that actually this is a valid condition that causes a lot of disruption in a young person's life, and they have every right to access the curriculum, to access the same opportunities as other children. I think it's quite difficult, and I think a lot of us are working towards the SEND advocacy on ADHD for that reason. Autism is recognised a bit better now, and we've got representatives and we've got people that do lots of wonderful organisations that do work, but ADHD still seems to be a little bit on the back burner. I try not to categorise too much as when I talk about my son as the comorbidity, because I'm very aware that he has two conditions. But I feel the ADHD side probably isn't supported as much as it could be. Even in terms of the professional intervention. So the clinic that my son goes to, I very much feel like we go there, they weigh him, they do his height and they send him on his way. I don't ever feel like I can have a well-rounded conversation or actually really speak to a professional about my concerns. I don't feel if they even know Noah. I mean, the same person's been seeing Noah for the last 4 years, and the last appointment we had, she asked us like questions which she already knew, which was a bit bizarre. So I set up SenTalk to support parents in that second school that Noah was at. Lots of parents happened to be going through the same thing, and news had travelled. So I had one friend whose daughter was in the stages of being diagnosed with autism. Autism in girls is a whole other issue because the symptoms don't display the same as typically in boys, and most of our case studies are done on boys exactly the same as ADHD. She needed some support, so I helped her and I helped her go through her education healthcare plan. Then after that, I had another parent come up to me that I didn't know, and they needed help, so I helped them. Then I found myself at least twice a week sitting in a coffee shop with, 10 or 15 parents, and suddenly they were from other schools. So I became this sort of unofficial SEND guru. It's quite bizarre. But my heart ached. I absolutely felt for these parents so much. So what I done last year was I just quit my job, and I was just like, that's it. So I no longer get paid, but I can wake up and I feel good because I know that I'm actually helping people, and the experience of going through the diagnosis, going through the medication choices, going through the education healthcare plan was so isolating. I cannot even think about one person that I spoke to that actually made me feel good at that time. There was nothing, and you can't relate to other parents at that point because they don't really understand. If they haven't got a child with similar issues, you're put in a band and that's it. So there were no play dates, put it that way. Okay, so as I said before, behaviour is communication. Alison knows, because we've discussed this, how I feel about de-escalation techniques. I feel that there's an emphasis on de-escalation techniques, so after situations happen. When it seems to me quite simple, I mean obviously the way that we put it in practice is early intervention. As soon as we start to recognise those signs, those symptoms, as soon as there's an inkling that there may be something more going on, that is when we need to step up, that is when professionals need to step up and put techniques and procedures and plans in place to support a young person. If it's monetary, I'm pretty sure you would save a lot more money this way. So I just thought it would be a nice picture to add there. Okay, so ADHD is a biological condition that makes it hard for children to concentrate and sit still. So ADHD children, as I was saying, in terms of their body, they seek to regulate. They want to regulate. Sensory regulation leads to emotional regulation. That is my thoughts on it. My organisation, SenTalk, has a heavy emphasis on OT support and SLT, and that goes right from 0 to 16. I don't think that there's an age group in between there that will not benefit from either OT or SLT in practice. I haven't even got my glasses on, which doesn't help. Okay, so I just put in this little quote here from the understood.org. I don't know if anybody knows of that website. I have got a useful websites page at the end that you can all look at. But frequent negative feedback for acting out or not paying attention can impact self-esteem and motivation, making a child feel he's bad or no good. So the lesson learned from Noah when he then went into year 1 was that if he was feeling that he was going to get a response one way, he had this frustration that was built up, and that's how he was going to get his response. This is important to note. Sensory issues with ADHD are not the same as sensory processing disorder. There is a distinction. It's controversial. It's a little bit of an argument. They do overlap, obviously, because they're both sensory based. Sensory processing disorder is about too much input and how you regulate by having too much input. Sensory issues with ADHD, they're more related to concentration, the need for input to help regulate your concentration. So they're slightly different, but there are some professionals that get a little bit upset when you start relating ADHD to sensory processing, when essentially it is sensory processing, but not the official buzzword, whatever you want to call it. So these are some techniques at home. I've told you a little bit about how occupational therapy can help regulate emotional behaviour, but I always feel it's all very good, but giving you some tangible ideas of things you can do at home is better, and things that I do with Noah. So Noah struggles a lot with transition and change. I'm sure a lot of your children probably find change very difficult. They like to know what's going on, so we have all these ideas of visual prompts and timetables, and we could do reward charts and all this sort of stuff until we're blue in the face, but simple things work too. So when my son goes to my mum's house, so when he goes to Nanny's, he has Nanny Tuesday, and when he gets there are 2 tins of paint at the front door, and he does it now habitually. It's just part of his everyday routine when he goes there. The reason for the tins of paint, as I said, heavy work is very important. All the stress and tension that's built up in the top of the body, which can sort of cause that surge of sort of aggression where they're sort of trying to regulate and understand what's actually going on, why they're feeling the way they are, it's almost released through that work. Occupational therapists will charge you hundreds of pounds to tell you this, but a tin of paint works just as well, believe. So he carries the tin of paint, 2 tins, from the front door to the back door. And it's, as I said, my son's quite articulate, and he's quite intelligent, but he hasn't really realised yet, and this has been going on for years, that this is a technique that we're using. So it's great. So because he wants to help, a lot of the time he actually does want to be really helpful. My mum will say to him, same time, Noah, could you just carry that tin of paint to the garden for me? Okay. And he does it, and he goes off, and then you can almost see, it's remarkable what OT can actually do for children with ADHD. You can actually see the release, and it just changes that. Chair straps, I've just realised what that looks like in real life. I'm not suggesting that we start doing that, I'm sure there are times, but no, this is just about the bands that you get. I don't know if you've seen them. There's bands that just go on the bottom of the chairs, and they're just a bit of a release. They just get a little bit of neurofeedback, which helps sort of create those impulses, and that can also help children regulate. There's other versions of things that do the same things for the receptors in the body. So you've got fidget spinners, you've got cubes, you've got all those sorts of things. The reason I didn't mention, I don't think I have mentioned them, didn't mention them is because, again, I don't know if anyone's aware, fidget spinners and cubes have become a bit of a fad, and there's a bit of an issue with a lot of schools, so they're not. So I wanted to actually give you things that would be okay. You can buy exercise straps for about £3 from Tiger, and they work just as well. Literally, just put them together on the chair. Even dinner time. So I find dinner time is just horrendous. Honestly, my son just he's over there and he's on the floor and the pasta's there, and it's so much fun. But I did try that, and it seems to work. He just likes to have a tap, have a little bit of a feedback, and it's just, he doesn't even know he's doing it. So it's great, it's discreet as well, you know. We don't actually want our children to feel like, hey, I'm over here, people can see them anyway. Simple thing as well, just breaking everything down. It's always about breaking everything down, isn't it? I wanted to tell you an interesting story about when I realised how much information I actually give my son in a short space of time. So we were getting ready, we were rushing one morning, as we're rushing most mornings, because it takes my son about an hour and 20 minutes to put clothes on. And that's, you know, with my help as well, and we've got pants going here and around the other way, and it's all very fun and creative in my house in the morning. I told him to put his bag on. So I'm like, oh my gosh, now I'm running late, so no, put your bag on. Have you got your shoes on? Have you done that? Have you got your, oh, Noah, come on, where's your book bag? And he just went, put everything on the floor, and he said, do you know what? I am not an octopus. And I just went, you're absolutely right, you're not. I gave you too much information. He said, yes. So, I think it's really good as well to communicate like that, because we do, you know, we're human beings, and we live in a fast-paced world. You know, there's people rushing by. I mean, I had a horrendous train journey today, and I've only come from Clapham Junction, but already I've had, you know, been barged and kicked, and don't wear flip-flops on the train. So I understand it from his perspective as a small person in this world trying to understand everything else. So the last thing they need is actually parents going, do this, do this, do this, do this. Yeah, it's too much, isn't it? Social games at home. This is really interesting. So speech and language, as I said, is another useful tool. But you know, there's a lot of theory behind speech and language techniques that are very, very relevant for lots of different age groups for children with ADHD. So when I found that Noah was really emotionally shutting down and not engaging, I devised a couple of little games I made up myself. So we played the emotional game, but we didn't call it that. We called it I sort of made up crazy Iron Action Man falling off a cliff game or something like that, which he liked. And I sat with my mum. My poor mum is very old school as well, so this was just hilarious, the whole point of it. And we just ripped up some paper, and I was encouraging my mum, so I was telling Noah that we were teaching Nanny how to talk about her emotions, because Nanny's very old school and she doesn't understand things like that, Noah. So I was saying, right, Nanny, tell us one good thing about your day. Write it on the paper, quickly. So Noah was like, what's she gonna do, what's she gonna do? So she wrote something down and then passed it back. And then it was my turn, so I'm like, oh gosh, what am I going to do now? What am I going to put down? So he was he was actually engaging then, and he could see, and he was giving me suggestions. This is a child that shuts down completely. You get one or the other. You get shut down or you get misread. And it worked. And then it came round to his turn, and he said, I hate it when everyone's talking. And then we went round, and then, you know, we said something positive and we said something negative. And just for a couple of minutes, and when he was really, really struggling, I'd done it in variations, made up different sort of versions of it, but it was all about sort of trying to recognise those emotions a couple of times a week. And it worked really well. And there are occasions when Noah will just randomly come into the front room and say, can we play one of those games? And that's it, you know, devising your own ways and techniques. You don't want anything to look like an intervention. That's the thing. You also, a lot of the time, don't want these children to think that they're being taught or that their expectations are on them. So that doesn't work either. So it's always about thinking outside the box and being a little bit more creative with it. Obviously, that being said, recognise the achievements, however small they seem. That's a massive thing. My son was very bad at receiving compliments or praise or anything like that. He would get very angry. So I've said he growls, he hisses and growls quite a lot. Slowly, we're actually getting to a point where he's now starting to take things to people to try in a bid to get that positive praise. And I think a lot of that is to do with the time invested at home and school So the social skills games, all the little pieces that we've put together. So with the OT work and all the sort of physical things we do at home as well, it's become part of a sensory diet. So it's a routine now that he's in, and I think that's actually really helped to almost lift the burden. So yeah. Interesting one, reflecting and choosing the right time. This is about when you have that really negative behaviour, that surge of aggression, or I'm going to use the word again, non-compliance, when you just can't get through to your child and there's nothing, and you almost end up having an argument. How many times have you been there and you thought, I've actually almost stepped out of my body and thought, having an argument with a 5-year-old. How did that happen? Do you know? So I think over the years I've got much better at letting things go, using a lot of distraction techniques, but readdressing it later. So my time, obviously this is within age appropriability, nowhere in the bath. So again, it kind of stems back to the OT work. Swimming or anything like that where the weight is completely off your body is a really good time to talk to a child. I found that the easiest way, again, when he had those real shutdowns where there was nobody was having a conversation with him at all, I could get, little by little, I could get bits out, and then gradually over the years that's got better. It's just, yeah, I mean, it works in different ways, but I think taking the weight off the body really does help. Stress management. Right, looking after ourselves, obviously. Again, it kind of stems into what I was just saying about reflecting. We need to reflect as well, because there are times where we do give too much information, or we do put a bit too many expectations on our children and we don't realise. So I think it's really important not to beat yourself up about it at all, but just to have dedicated time to just spend 5 minutes, just look after yourself. It's really hard. I mean, my mum was saying to me the other day, I probably haven't bought new clothes in 2 years and I didn't realise. But Noah's fine. He's absolutely, he loses a jumper every other day, but he's never going without. So yeah, it's about looking after yourself. Lego therapy, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the techniques of Lego therapy. So it's another speech and language devised strategy. It was designed by Dr. Lee Goff, which I always find is really funny because that's quite an odd name for somebody that loves Lego. he wrote an amazing book called Lego Based Therapy. And SenTalk, my charity that I run, we run courses of Lego therapy for children. It's an intervention block for 6 weeks. So it's children that have ADHD conditions, autism, but mainly the more challenging behavioural type conditions that we're looking at. And it's about inadvertently teaching those children or showing them about social skills without them realising. So again, it's very similar to a distraction technique. They've got something there that they really enjoy doing that can keep, so you're already meeting the distraction technique. Then you're meeting the need to fiddle, the need to regulate, because they've got all these bits of Lego and they don't realise actually, I've started talking to Pete and we're having quite a nice conversation, but I don't know because I've got this really good tower. And it really does work. There is a really good strategy, so it's with 3 children and they have different roles that they have to do. So the roles are very fair as well, which is what I really like about it, because obviously with children with ADHD you can't give someone a role and they've got three lines and that one's got 2 lines, and that's just never going to work, is it? And they shift around. But I find Lego therapy really good as well for parents to use at home. If you have a child that's into construction, it doesn't have to be Lego, you can strategise and give each other a role. What I will do, Alistair, if it's okay, is I'll send you some more information about Lego. We've actually got a social skills game for parents, so if anybody's interested, I'll send it to Alistair and you can have a look at that you might want to do at home. And yeah, so making your own choices is what I was saying about the medication, and decide what works for your child, because there's lots of ideas about different OT techniques and SLT techniques, but ultimately you are the professional when it comes to your child, and you will understand what is going to be beneficial and what's not.